This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. When you hear philosophy of life, that term Lebens philosophy, well, one name usually jumps out, right?
Nietzsche. Almost always Nietzsche.
Exactly. And the way it's often taught, it feels like this sudden explosion in the 19th century, kind of rejection of cold, hard reason for something more vital, alive.
A dramatic break.
But the sources we've dug into for today, they paint a really different picture, a much deeper, honestly, a more fascinating history.
Definitely more complex.
So our mission here is to trace what you might call this hidden underground stream of thought, an idea that actually ran alongside the main dominant tradition of Western reason, the Logos, for centuries.
It wasn't sudden at all.
Not at all. It feels more like it finally just broke through the surface with Nietzsche rather than starting with him. Okay, let's unpack this. What we're really looking for here are philosophical systems that saw existence itself as dynamic, as this generating active force.
Right, creative.
Yeah.
Not just a static blueprint or a fixed set of rules.
Precisely. Which is a huge contrast to those purely rational, sort of geometric models of the world. What you're going to discover, I think, is this hidden line connecting, believe it or not, ancient Greeks, some pretty radical medieval mystics, figures like Spinoza.
Oh, Spinoza's huge here.
Absolutely. All leading eventually to this modern idea of, well, existence as physics. It's quite a journey.
It really is. It's like doing historical archaeology on ideas. Because Western thought, well, it seems it's always had this kind of dual structure, hasn't it?
Explain that. Logos versus bios.
Yeah, exactly. Logos, that's the side emphasizing order, reason, stability, fixed identity. Think Plato, formal logic. But then there's bios life.
Yeah.
Generation, movement, flux, change.
And in the bios lineage, it was often sidelined or even seen as dangerous.
Often, yeah. Heretical sometimes or just ignored by the mainstream academies. But it never went away. It was always there, offering a different perspective for people who saw the universe less like a solved math problem and more like a living thing, an organism.
Okay, so if we follow that stream back past the Greeks like Heraclitus, where does it first really get, let's say, philosophically formalized in the West? Rome.
Rome is a key place, especially with Stoicism. Seneca, Marcus Aurelius.
Right.
Their idea of the logos spermaticos. That's crucial. It translates roughly as seminal reason or cosmic life.
Seminal reason? Like seed reason.
Kind of, yeah. The idea is that reason isn't this abstract thing outside the world like maybe Plato implied. For the Stoics, the universe itself was a giant living organism. And logos reason was the inherent life-giving principle within everything. It's immanent.
So it's not a distant god pulling strings. It's the life force in the strings, so to speak.
Exactly. And that changes ethics completely.
How so?
Well, their virtue, their whole ethical system, wasn't about obeying external commands from on high. It was about living according to nature, physis, aligning yourself with that natural cosmic flow.
So it's an active ethics, affirming life, affirming the natural law you're part of.
Precisely. You find virtue by syncing up with the creative, moving energy of the cosmos, which, when you think about it, is a surprisingly vitalist view for the Romans.
And this focus on dynamism, does it carry on?
It does, yeah. You see it pop up again, perhaps unexpectedly, in Neoplatonism with Plotinus.
Plotinus. But he's a Platonist, right? Plato gave us those eternal, unchanging forms. Static.
Nominally, yes. But Plotinus does something really clever. He reinterprets Plato. For Plotinus, existence isn't about fixed things. It's about continuous emanation, a flow outwards from this source he calls the One.
Like a fountain.
Sort of, yeah. Nothing is ever static or finished. Everything's always dynamically unfolding, flowing out. And this shift from fixed being to ongoing generation, that's absolutely critical.
Critical.
Because it turns Plato's static forms into something active. It makes Neoplatonism this crucial, maybe hidden relay station. It connects that early Greek idea of flux, Heraclitus, all the way through, visually towards Nietzsche and the moderns. It keeps the idea of dynamic life alive in philosophy.
Okay, that makes sense. And amazingly, this idea of flow, of dynamism, it even survives the Middle Ages, which you think of as incredibly rigid intellectually.
Right, the scholastic period, very structured.
But it doesn't survive in the universities, necessarily?
Not so much in the formal theology, no.
Yeah.
It stays alive more in the mystical traditions. Think of figures like Meister Eckhart or Hildegard of Bingen.
The mystics, how do they keep it going?
They had this radical vision of the living God, not some static, absolute king on a throne far away, but God as an internal Lebensquell.
A life spring.
Yes, a spring of life within. And they had this incredible idea that the moment of creation is eternal.
The moment of creation is eternal. I like that. What does that mean practically?
It means creation isn't something that happened once, way back then. It's happening now. It's this intrinsic, ongoing, generating movement that's part of reality in every single moment.
Wow. That sounds almost like modern physics in a way, or process thought.
It's a direct precursor. It anticipates 20th century thinkers like Whitehead. This mystical path kept the concept of dynamic generation as a live philosophical option, even if it was, underground.
Which brings us forward again to a really key turning point. The 17th century. The mystics are keeping this flame alive, maybe flickeringly, but then one philosopher takes this dynamic view and builds a whole system around it.
Spinoza.
Spinoza. This is where the equation flips everything, isn't it?
Absolutely. You could argue Spinoza is the single most important philosophical ancestor for Nietzsche in this lineage. He's the one who really formalized the equation. Existence equals activity equals life.
Existence, activity, life. How does he do that?
Through his most famous or maybe infamous statement, Deus sive naturia, God or nature.
God or nature, meaning?
Meaning they are one and the same thing. And this God nature isn't a passive entity, not a static designer sitting outside the universe. God nature is infinite actio, infinite activity.
Infinite activity, so everything that exists.
It's just a necessary expression of nature's endless process of self-generation. It's all unfolding according to its own internal logic.
Okay, hold on. Why is making existence synonymous with activity such a radical departure? I mean, Descartes, his contemporary, saw God more as a guarantor of reality, right? Something stable.
Exactly. Stable, maybe even static. Spinoza's move is radical because it completely gets rid of transcendence. If God is the infinite activity of nature, then there's no outside for a creator or a mover to exist.
Ah, I see. Reality generates itself. It orders itself. It's constantly moving from within.
Precisely. It reclaims that old Stoic idea of cosmic life, the logos spermaticos, but grounds it in this incredibly rigorous, geometric, metaphysical system. It's a total worldview shift.
And the ethical outcome of this, you mentioned Spinoza emphasized, Letitia, the joy of life. How does that link up with Nietzsche's later idea of amor fati?
They're incredibly close. Both Letitia and amor fati, the love of fate, are about affirming what is. They're ethical frameworks built on embracing reality as it actually exists in all its dynamism and necessity.
So maximizing your own power to act within that reality.
Yes. It's about increasing your power of acting, your participation in nature's activity. This is the source of joy for Spinoza. It's completely opposed to ethical systems based on striving for some impossible, transcendent ideal or systems built on, guilt, sin, negation.
Right. Spinoza basically says the universe is perfect because it's active and unfolding, necessarily. So affirming your active role in it, loving your fate within it, that's the highest ethical good.
You got it.
Yeah.
He provides the philosophical bedrock for saying yes to life, just as it is.
Okay, so after Spinoza, the thread seems to get picked up a bit later by Romanticism, people like Goethe, before it gets woven into Hegel.
That's a good way to put it. The Romantics, especially Goethe, had this deep feeling for lebendige nature, living nature. And they talked a lot about Bildung.
Bildung. That's like formation or self-cultivation.
Yes, but specifically in an organic sense, living formation generation. They saw nature not as a clockwork mechanism like some Enlightenment thinkers did, but as this continuously developing organic process. And that organic view was exactly what Hegel needed.
Needed for what? Because here's where it gets really interesting. Hegel is usually seen as the pinnacle of reason, right? Absolute spirit. Yet you're saying he takes this vitalism, this life focus from Spinoza and the Romantics.
And pulls it right into the heart of his system. He brings das Leben, life, into the very core of Vernunft's reason.
How does that work? How can reason be alive?
Well, Hegel realized, I think, that if reason were just static, fixed categories, it would be dead. It couldn't explain history, change, self-consciousness, anything dynamic. So for Hegel, the dialectic itself, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is the rational structure of the movement of life.
Ah, so the process of reason thinking itself is a life process.
No. Exactly. His Geist, or spirit, isn't dead reason. It's lebendige Vernunft, living reason. It's a process, constantly unfolding, recognizing itself, structuring existence through its own activity. Life becomes rationalized and reason becomes alive.
And what's fascinating there is how this view, this living reason, potentially opens up knowledge. Hegel's big push towards universal knowledge, his Vernunftglaube, reason faith, wasn't meant just for academics in Germany, was it?
No, not at all. He saw it as the divine self-recognition realized in human thought. the structure of reality becoming aware of itself through us.
That sounds almost mystical again.
It has echoes, definitely. And structurally, you can see parallels with, say, the Islamic tradition of ilm, knowledge-seeking. In that tradition, actual reason is seen as capable of grasping the divine order directly.
Meaning truth isn't locked away in specific scriptures or only available through prophets.
Right. It suggests truth is potentially open to anyone through careful, rational thinking. It's a kind of democratization of insight.
So Hegel tried to make philosophy pure thought into this universal language, more universal than, say, art or religion, which he saw as maybe limited by cultural symbols or metaphors.
That was the ambition, yes. Philosophy is the open theology for all mankind, where the divine order reveals itself through universal reason, accessible to everyone. He tries to complete the project of reason.
But this brings us back to that friction point you mentioned earlier, something you flagged in the sources.
Right, the constant need for philosophy to kind of make peace with existing powers.
Yes, this reconciliation work. It feels like if you trace this bios lineage, Stoics, mystics, Spinoza, even Hegel, there's always this pressure from religious or political authorities, forcing philosophy to fit itself into a pre-approved box, demanding it reconcile pure thought with established dogma.
Which often ends up, let's be honest, muddling the philosophical water.
Exactly. Did it just muddy them, or did it fundamentally constrain the thinking?
Oh, it was a fundamental constraint. This tension was just a basic feature of doing philosophy for almost 2,000 years. Look at the Middle Ages. Philosophy was explicitly called the handmaiden of theology. Fides quaerens intellectum. Faith-seeking understanding.
So inquiry was allowed, even systematized by thinkers like Aquinas.
Absolutely. Brilliant systematization, but always within limits. There was always this wall of theology. You can think this far, but no further. Certain conclusions were off limits from the start.
And was that just, philosophers trying not to get into trouble, self-censorship, or did it actually change the shape of their philosophical systems?
It absolutely shaped the systems themselves. Even when philosophers in the early modern period were fighting for more autonomy, look at the compromises they still made. Descartes needs God's honesty to even trust his own reason. He can't ground it independently.
Right. God wouldn't deceive us.
Kant carefully sets limits to reason, explicitly to make space for faith, for God, freedom, immortality. Things reason couldn't prove, but he felt were necessary.
He cordoned off a space for faith.
Precisely. And even Spinoza, who comes closest to a purely immanent self-generating system, he still has to use that ambiguous phrase, "Deus natura," God or nature. It allows him to talk about infinite substance and activity without explicitly ditching theological language altogether, even if his system implicitly does.
So the pure air of thought, the radical implications of life generating itself, was always sort of compromised, filtered through the need to appease or at least not directly confront religious authority.
You could definitely argue that. It had to pay lip service or find careful formulations to avoid provoking the guardians of static transcendent order.
Okay. And this context then makes Nietzsche's big dramatic break seem, well, almost structurally necessary.
Yes, if you accept the purity and potential of this underground biostream.
Then his death of God wasn't just some edgy cultural statement. It was a necessary philosophical act. He had to metaphorically kill the God that philosophy itself kept needing as a presupposition, as a backstop, as a guarantor.
He had to clear the air, you could say, to try and reclaim that pure vision of nature's own inherent generating power, the power that maybe Heraclitus glimpsed, that Spinoza systematized, but that kept getting tangled up with theology.
Right. That break, however harsh, allows us to finally trace the de-theologized lineage of generation right into the modern era. And you said to do that properly, we need to look again at Aristotle.
We do, because he's usually put firmly in the logos camp.
Yeah, Aristotle, the father of logic, metaphysics, defining categories, essences.
Mr. Static Definition himself, right?
That's the standard picture. But some of the source material suggests that his real genius, the core of his thought, might have been almost buried under the weight of his own later influence.
Buried how?
The argument is that his metaphysics and his formal logic, while obviously hugely influential, might have been in a way unnecessary baggage. Baggage perhaps inherited from his teacher, Plato. And this baggage turned Aristotle into the great definer of existence, the guy who sorts everything into boxes.
Instead of the radical observer of life that he also was, maybe primarily was.
Okay, so if we strip away that formal logic baggage, What's the core Aristotelian insight that fixed this bios lineage?
His concept of physis.
Physis. We heard that with the Stoics. Nature.
Yes, but for Aristotle, it's specifically the internal generating principle or power within a thing. Its innate drive to become what it is meant to be. He was fascinated by the movement from dynamis potentiality to energeia actuality.
The classic example being the acorn.
Exactly. The potential oak tree, dynamis, is already there within the acorn. And its physis, its internal life force, is what drives its development, its movement into the actual oak tree. Energeia, its life as an inherent, self-directing, self-ordering principle. No external mover needed for that specific process.
Wow. So if he'd only been read through that biological, ecological lens.
He could have been seen as the founder of a purely naturalistic Lebensphilosophy. Instead, he got cemented as the founder of logic and fixed categories.
Okay, that distinction, life as internal, self-ordering power, that feels like the main highway for this underground stream. You can draw a pretty straight line now.
You can. Heraclitus' flux, Aristotle's physis, the Stoics' logos spermatikos, Spinoza's deus ex natura, Nietzsche's affirmation.
And then into the 20th century, process philosophers.
Right, Bergson with his élan vital, Whitehead's process theology, and then later thinkers like Deleuze, and even feeding into some contemporary movements like the New Realists or speculative realists.
It becomes, as you said earlier, almost like the physics of existence.
Exactly, because once you fully commit to stripping away the theological language, God, soul, transcendent purpose, what language are you left with to describe dynamic generation?
The language of science, I suppose.
Right. You have to talk about systems, processes, feedback loops, emergence, intensity, energy, movement. The philosophy of life has to adopt the vocabulary of physics, biology, complexity theory.
And that's where we find this bios lineage today, in movements like object-oriented ontology, OC, or new materialism.
I think so, yes. Those movements, in different ways, are trying to think about reality, all of reality, not just human minds, as composed of active processes, relations, forces, flows. They're trying to describe the inherent dynamism of things.
It's like the physics of existence, or maybe the biology of generation applied universally.
That's a good way to frame it. Viewing the cosmos itself as this ongoing field of energy and movement, organization and disorganization, without needing a human perspective to grant it reality or meaning. It's like philosophy has finally returned fully to nature, trying to understand its processes on their own terms.
Which circles back to Aristotle's physis in a way, but now armed with modern science, a kind of godless life's own order.
Precisely, the inherent order arising from activity itself.
So what does this all mean? We've started out questioning this idea that Nietzsche just invented Lebensphilosophy out of the blue. And what we found is this persistent counter-history, a philosophy focused on dynamic, self-generating life that was always there, bubbling under the surface, often struggling against the dominant paradigm of static, transcendent reason.
It seems that underground stream has finally really broken through in the last century or so. It's surfaced, and interestingly, it's shed a lot of the old metaphysical or theological language and integrated itself with the language and findings of natural science.
So the old tension, logos versus bios, maybe it's resolving itself by using reason, logos, to study life bios in a much more direct, less human-centric way.
That could be one interpretation. The philosophy of life today isn't just about human vitality anymore. It's often attempting a grander synthesis. Cosmology, biology, ontology, all rolled into one, focused on process and relation.
Okay, so to leave our listeners with something to chew on.
Right. If we really take this lineage seriously, if we accept that core idea running from ancient physics right through to modern systems theory, this idea of godless life's own order, if existence truly doesn't need an external creator or a static blueprint to function, if it just generates itself,
Then what?
then what kind of ethics emerge? What imperatives arise solely from the reality of activity, of generation, of interrelation itself? If there's no external lawgiver, does the sheer fact of dynamic existence create its own values? That's the big, maybe unsettling, but fascinating question this whole hidden history leaves us with.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.